guys, and welcome to Contemporary History. I am Professor Moore, and I'm super excited to be here with you guys for the next 8 weeks as we explore history. When we talk about contemporary history, we are actually denoting a specific time period. So, basically, what contemporary history means is that we're just looking at history from the 1900s and then, on until the present day. So we're looking at modern history. Okay, guys. So we'll go more into that here in just a few minutes. Just want to start off with a little bit of housekeeping so that we're all on track with getting started with class. First of all, I'd like to talk about our online office hours. I know you guys have hopefully seen that link in the announcement. Hopefully everybody's been able to get into class and kind of get around and are comfortable navigating and all that good stuff. So, with our offices, every week we are going to have an office on Tuesdays and an office on Wednesdays. Now, guys, these are not mandatory or required for you to show up with these. These are just simply a time each week that you can catch me live with any questions, comments, or concerns about class. Now, in saying that, I do want to add that I am always available by email, and we can always set up a phone chat or a private office setting if you guys can't make it during these times. Now, the Tuesday ones, I'm always going to have some kind of lecture. I'll have like an overview of our assignments and pointers and tips for the week. And then Wednesday is just an open office. So you guys got to think of that like if you're at a building, you have the traditional school and you're at a building and your instructors have a specific time that they're in their office in that building. That's what this is. It's just, because we're not all together in one place, we just do it virtually. So like I said, Tuesdays, I'll always record and put those in the announcements for you guys to watch at your own convenience. And then just to anybody wants to question. Um, we'll do that in just a minute, but just to point out announcements whenever you log into a class, it's important that you check those announcements. That's where I'm going to communicate important information for you guys. I'll give you like APA examples and tips to help with that. Give you guys like tips for helping with your writing, and just let you know when grades are posted, remind you of dates, and just anything that will help us all be successful in class. I will make sure to always post in those announcements. And then that mindfulness exercise and the check my draft, we'll go over that in just a minute, you guys. The attestation, that's a mouthful, right? If you haven't taken the attestation yet, please make sure to do that before Sunday. That's something else we used to be required to have to do that, and if you didn't do it, like, class would be locked up, but we're not required to do that anymore. However, it is highly recommended that you go and take that. It's real simple, real quick, just kind of like a little academic integrity thing. And then I believe it maybe shows you a little bit of class or asks you if you like to understand and read the syllabus, kind of things on that nature. So it's not anything too terribly difficult. Okay, guys, I will make sure to post this in an announcement too, so that we're, not confused throughout class. So because of the COVID-19, we have changed our discussion requirements for this semester. It's really important that you guys remember this, because when you go and look at class and you look at those discussions, you'll still see the old requirements, and you'll see that that's more than you're supposed to do. So since we understand that everybody is super busy and hectic with the epidemic going on right now, we have lessened those discussion requirements. So you only need 2 posts each week. You need your initial post and then just one participation post. And so those initial posts always have to be posted by Wednesday of the week, and then you have until Sunday to get into and to get in your participation vacation. Sunday is always the last day of the week. So, don't really think of that as the to do dates. Think of it more as the last day to submit those assignments and get those discussions in. And I would encourage you to try not to wait until Sunday to get your participation in, because we spend a lot of time in our discussions, and you get a lot of information in there that'll help you with the assignments and help with your final project that's due at the end of this semester. And we'll talk more about that as we move closer to working on that. But, it's just a good rule of thumb to try to get in there, before the last day, like I said, till you get something out of those discussions. However, though, guys, I do understand that, we all have different schedules and stuff like that. So, just note that, we don't need three participation or three posts each week. As you will see in those discussion requirements, you just need two. And I know, at the beginning of class, that sounds really confusing, but, just get it in your head that you only need two, and we'll kind of get more used to that routine as we go through, and won't pay attention to what those discussions say, because we just weren't able to change that in the course shell for the semester. So that's why you'll still see it tells you three posts throughout. So make sure that you pay more attention to my post, that you still see that it's just two posts, 2 days each week. Okay, guys? All right, so give me just a minute here, and we will go and walk through class real quickly, and just a way to make sure that we're all on the same page and comfortable with navigating through class, so that, we're all as successful as can be. And guys, I am here for anything that you would need in class. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I am more than happy to help you, but, anything to help you be successful in your academic career. All right, guys. So when you first log into class, you're always going to log in, and it's going to show you the home screen like you see right here. And at the top, you will always see there's going to be a recent announcement. So whatever the last announcement I post is going to be up there. However, there's always going to be more than just that one announcement. So if you go to this announcement here over on the tree on the left side, we call that a navigation tree there. If you go to that, it'll show you every announcement that I've ever or posted in class. So a lot of times students get confused, because it'll show as soon as I post the recording with the online office, it'll show that to you in those recent announcements on the home page. But then once I post something else, it kind of like makes that disappear on the home page. But if you go to the announcements, you will always see all the posts that are in there. Okay, guys? And then just real quickly, you see that right now I have that link to our online office. That's never going to change. Every week, it's always going to be the same link to get into that. And I'll try to make sure that I post that every week too, before our Tuesday meeting, so that everybody has that if you do want to come and join me for these. And then you'll see that I've got some examples of how to cite our course text, kind of help you guys out with APA. I know that all of us always have a little bit of trouble with that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on here too. Let me point that out, this out to you guys. As far as these office recordings on Tuesdays go, the first one is usually the longest one that we do, because we have some housekeeping like stuff to get through. Let's be all on the same page with starting off class. And lastly, I just want to point out that I have that announcement up that has a little mindfulness practice in it, and I include that for two reasons. Well, three reasons, I guess. One is because as you guys know from the introductions, I'm working on my PhD in psychology, and so and I'm looking at kind of therapy and my practices. So I always like to include one of those for us, no matter what class I'm teaching. And then secondly, mindfulness practices are just a good way for us to help clear our heads and kind of relax so that we're able to focus on the task at hand. And then thirdly, why I do it, especially for you guys with Chamberlain, is because statistically studies show that nurses are pretty much the most stressed and overwhelmed out of any, degree, career choice that somebody can choose. Probably doctors maybe, like number one, but, nurses are super stressed, guys. I know that. And studies have shown that finding some type of mindfulness practices, some type of meditation, that's kind of another way. It's kind of a type of mindfulness practice that if you find one of those, that it just really helps with, managing and alleviating stress in your life. And then you can just go through and, look at all the rest of these links. Hopefully, since we had preview week last week, everybody has had a chance to at least, go through and walk themselves to class. So, once again, guys, if you need anything, any questions about anything in class, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. That is what I'm here for. And once again, guys, I am more than happy to help with anything you guys need. All right, next, I just want to quickly walk us through the modules link here. And if you guys notice what I like to, one of the good things about Canvas is that we can have, multiple tabs open at one time, and that really helps. So like, you can have the modules open and you're looking at like the little lectures that are in there, and then you can have a tab open with like the textbook, and then say if you want to have like the discussion tab open, so as you're reading and going through the materials, you can take notes and match it up to the discussions and assignments for that week. So just a little trick there on easy on a way to navigate Canvas a little easier. And so I just, if you notice, I just, right click on it, and it opens that new tab. And so basically, the tree over here on the left, those are just the different pages that we have in class. And, like I said, it's always a good idea to at least go to the start here your first time and walk yourself through each of those pages. And then after you do that, you can use, I'll show you guys that in a minute. And then I did this backwards, sorry. And then after you do that, I'd recommend that, this module link is pretty much where everything you're going to need in classes. So it's a lot easier just to kind of, right click and open that. Make sure that you guys go through and have access to the book. There shouldn't be any reason that you would have to buy a hard copy unless you just want to, or you need it. But for the most part, our book is provided for us. So that's just something less that we have to worry about. If you are somebody that likes having a hard copy, I would recommend going to Amazon and doing the rentals. I think it's like less than $30, and super. I believe with our book, it's like 26 or something to rent it. So I mean, super easy. You get the book, they send you, the material to ship it, and then when you're done, it's kind of like going to the library. When you're done, you just kind of return it, and so it's pretty easy. So if you guys want that option there. And then last, what I want to point out here on the modules is that when you go down to the bottom, you will see that I've got some resources in here for us. So I've got these APA examples and resources. So just, bunch of different examples of, pretty much anything you would ever need with APA. We've had a few updates because we're on the 7th edition now. Not too many changes there. I'll go over like the main change to that we need to worry about as far as just our class and your education in general goes there. And then if you keep scrolling down, you'll notice then that I've got a bunch of different writing tips and resources of that nature to help you guys with, plagiarism, thesis statements, just anything that I could think of that, students usually come to me as far as writing in APA are concerned. I provide these resources for you. And these resources that I provide on APA and writing, guys, they're pretty much standard and universal. That means that, any class you take, any subject that you would take, these tips are going to apply to all of that. And my biggest thing is keep it basic and simple. Like I said, we'll go over that in a minute. And then last one I want to point out to you guys is I have this folder set up for us called Check My Drafts. So in academic writing, it's always important that we follow the 80-20 rule of originality. So that means we write in 80% our own words and no more than 20% cited sources. So when you use that Check My Draft folder, it's a way for you, it checks it and turn it in for you. Now, of course, when you submit an assignment, it'll automatically run it through Turn It In. But if you go here and do the Check My Draft first, that's like your own personal folder. So if you come up more than 20% similarity, you can just, look for what is highlighted and then go back and rewrite that, and then it won't show up in the assignment link. See, because sometimes the way the Canvas is set up, and it sees those high percentages in the actual assignment links, and it kind of looks bad on you guys. So if you use that little Check My Draft, and you can edit all that down. And, just a little tip. And that is not something that gets graded. The way I have to set that up, it kind of looks like it's a graded assignment, but it's not. It's just like, you do it or you don't. And I provide this to you guys to check any of your work. So, I don't go in and look at that folder unless you would specifically ask me to, for help with your assignment. But I mean, you guys, if you want to use it for papers in your other classes, I'm okay with that. That is for you guys to use. That's just another tool to help you with being successful in your academic career. Give me just a second here, guys. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to go over. No, that's all I want to go into class. So give me just a minute here. Just once again, though, let me reiterate that, we only have to do 2 discussion posts this semester. I know it reads as 3, but just remember you only need your initial post on Wednesday and then 1 participation post no later than Sunday that week. And like I said, guys, if you need anything, just reach out to me. Give me just a minute here. Get back into PowerPoint. All right, so for our discussion this week, like I said, since we're starting with contemporary history, we're starting at the beginning of the 19th century. So most of the time, when we are taught about history, we're kind of taught about it on that, that straight timeline, and it's usually a bunch of names and dates, and sometimes it can seem very dry and very removed from us, right? Because sometimes it seems kind of boring when you're always just having names and dates thrown at you, right, guys? However, when it comes to history, history is just the stories of the people that came before us. We use those names and those dates as kind of reference points. But when we look at history, it does not occur on a straight line. I would say that it's more it's more like a scatter plot. You know what I mean? To where it's like we've got all these different little points that kind of all come together, and then they kind of all go back. It's just a way of interrelating those stories. That's a good way to say, those kind of timeline ways of viewing history. So we do that in this class, and then of course we try, what I always encourage is trying to, kind of take that step back and actually, try to get a feel of those stories, try to put ourselves in the places of the people, and what was their mindset, what were they going through, because that really helps us get a better understanding of just why people have made the decisions that they have made. So when it comes to these things like racism, nationalism, imperialism, war, there's always some kind of human behavior and mindset that goes along with that. And, when we can develop more of a personal understanding of history, it's like looking at our own past. You know, we in our life, we do those self-examinations, and you look to your past and you look at what you did right and you look at what you did wrong, and you use that information to kind of inform you and help you move forward so that you could be a better version of yourself, right? And that's just the same with history. It's just history is that collective story of what it means to be human. Okay, so just a little overview of just history there, guys. And then, and starting with the 19th century, of course, industrialism is probably the like and the main technological advance that we had in the 19th century. But really, when it comes to, the main event that totally changed the world would be World War I. And for the most part, I would think that most of us have that basic have heard, at least heard, that World War I started with the assassination of Ferdinand there in Austria. And that is true. That was kind of like, once again, wasn't a straight timeline, but that was the point that was pretty much like the straw that broke the camel's back. There were still all these other things that were going on that led to that moment. And then, there were a lot of different things that went on after that that then encompass what we would call World War I. So an easy way to look at the causes of World War I is that acronym MAIN. So the four main causes are militarism, the alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. And even though we start with contemporary history and with World War I, let's back up for just a few minutes and go back to the 14th century. So basically, when we look at history, the 14th century is a defining time in history because this is when we started to really get cultural diversity and cultural contact. This is when we started making that globalized world that we live in today. And of course, that started with, the Europeans going out and exploring other parts of the world and finding these other cultures. And most of it was based on resources and trade. The whole reason that Europeans had to go out and wanted to start getting these luxury goods and these spices and these other products from the Far East, and because they didn't have them, but at the same time, the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, they were kind of blocking the Europeans from advancing any farther along the continent. So that's why we started this sea travel and found the way around Africa down and over to the Spice Islands, because in the 1400s that was the big thing. Everybody was trying to get to the Spice Islands. And there's my donkey. And then, of course, then in trying to find another route to those islands, we have Spain going, what it would be going west and discovering the Americas. And then with that was where we see imperialism come into play because, in finding these different places, we all of a sudden, Europeans have and they have these choices of these different kind of products that people didn't have. So for example, in South America, so they have things like spices and porcelain and silk out in the Far East. And then once they go west and discover the Americas, they have things like tobacco, sugar plantations. And so this was very new and revolutionary for people at the time because, they didn't have the technology or the means of communication that we have, especially in the 1400s. At that time, people, especially in Europe, we were still living in the feudal system. So, it was that kings and queens and the majority of the population, which probably would be like all of us if we lived during that time, were at the bottom. They were the poor peasants that, did everything for everybody else and or for the rich people and, didn't really get anything out of it. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. It's important to remember that because that kind of relates, I think, a little bit to imperialism. you know but anyway, my point is, and so we have all these new choices and all this kind of different stuff, and it's very exciting time because oh, here's where I was going. I mean, still in the 1400s, people are living in these little feudal villages in Europe, and so you're not having a lot of contact with people outside of your little village there. And so at this time, people still very much believe that there were, monsters that lived on the other side of the mountain. So it was very exciting to get these stories of these new places and all this new stuff. So we could see how that kind of excitement gets generated for people. I guess in a way you kind of think of it as like around Christmas time when we all get excited about, getting those new products and gadgets that come out. It's kind of similar feelings there, when we started these trade routes. And so then to kind of briefly nutshell from the 1400s to the 1900s, but starting with those trade routes and those products, we then start to have cultures come together. And so that's when of course you need militaries, because now you have more people, more resources that you have to protect. That's when we start seeing these alliance systems. You have to have friends, because there's going to be somebody, there's always going to be somebody that doesn't like you, or that is mad at you. And so you have to worry about having that protection and safety. And then when you start getting higher up in society, as far as levels and like governments and stuff, once again you have more people and resources to take care of. So it's important that you have a military. And then nationalism is actually an interesting idea. When it comes down to it, in anthropology we have this idea called ethnocentrism, and you actually read a little bit about this with Kipling's poem this week if you decide to do that as your assignment. Well, even with the genocide, there's ethnocentrism and nationalism involved there. So basically ethnocentrism, sorry, that's a tricky word, is that everybody believes that their culture is the best. That's just kind of how we are as human beings. We think that, we think we know everything. We think we have the right way of doing something. And, it's when we want to go out and tell everybody else, no, you're wrong. You have to do it our way. That's when we really start getting into problems. And that's, hence World War One, this need to have more resources, these trade routes, and then this need to prove that you're better than everybody else. That can create a lot of conflict in life. Being human is not about us. Being human means, yes, we are our best at what we are best at. You know what I mean? So like the culture that say lives in the Philippine culture, who lives in the Philippine Islands, they're the ones who are best adapted to live in that environment, because that's how they know it. We're best adapted to live here, and that's how we know. And so it works out much better when we acknowledge that, in order to move forward and to be human, that we can all have our own gifts that we can bring to the table, instead of saying, nope, this is the only one and everybody else has to be like that, which is what we see. We've done that a lot throughout history, right, guys? So that's just kind of what nationalism is. Nationalism is having pride in your culture. Nationalism is about having a sense of identity. And as human beings, those are important for us. Those are important to life. Those are important for us just to kind of have a purpose in life. And, like I said, those things turn bad when we start to look at when we start judging and saying, well, good, you're bad because you don't do it our way, or we just don't like you because of the color of your skin, or whatever way that history has shown us as human beings that we can treat each other. And then that sounds really negative, right? Of course, history is not all negative. There's some really wonderful and beautiful things that we have done together as human beings, right, guys? And so I have these two YouTube links in here for you. I don't think you can click on those in the recording, but they are these videos on YouTube. They are called Crash Course. If you guys haven't seen them, I would recommend watching them. They're super short, and they're just really good, clear overview of these historical events that we talk about in class. So I've just so if you just type in crash course, and you can type in, World War I started number 209, or just put crash course 209, and it should pull up in the search those videos for you. But, not recommended, but they're just great videos. Everybody seems to always love them. It doesn't matter like what's the age group or anything, like across the board, all students always enjoy watching those, and they really are good overviews, like I said. All right, so what we see here is just a map of Europe, and kind of file that away in kind of like the back of your memory, because what we will see by the time we get to the end of class, that this map changes with each kind of historical moment that we go through, right? And so it's so land is definitely one of the biggest things that we fight over as human beings. So we fight over resources and we fight over land. And so, having all the power and control of that land is definitely a struggle that we see in Europe, and especially during this time. Like I've already mentioned, we have the Ottoman Empire, and if you go over on the other side of Russia, you got the Middle East going up. So we had the Ottoman and the Persian empires that were kind of like, preventing Europe from advancing anymore to the east. And then, we've got the African continent down there. That is probably one of the main um, places that was exploited by imperialism. And, one of the reasons for that is because the African continent is huge. I mean, it's really big. When we talk about Africa, a lot of times people think it's like one country, and or they think that the people are all the same. And, there's a lot of diversity, not only to just the land, but the cultural groups that live there too. And then in addition to that, there are a lot of resources, some of the most precious resources, gold, silver, gems. Excuse me, gemstones, those are, there's so much of that is on the African continent. So as we'll see here in a few weeks, imperialism, there was this scramble to Africa to once again get all those resources, enslave the people. And so that is something that we see as a result of imperialism. And so, you see how that once again relates back to those ideas of trade routes. And so that kind of brings us up to speed on the beginning of World War I. So we have all these things going on. And we have each of these main countries in Europe kind of vying for power with each other. So Germany, France, Great Britain, Russia are usually our main ones that we see throughout history. Of course, Spain too, because of their involvement with the United States. But I want to focus on Germany, France, Great Britain, and Russia, because those are definitely the main forces that we see in World War I. So when we look at our map here, we see Serbia kind of down here by Greek and the Mediterranean Sea. We got the Black Sea over here on the right. And then what I say, we've got the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. So because Europe couldn't just travel by land to go east, and then in a lot of even Africa from like the 1400s to about the 1700s, we're still we're controlled by the Ottomans, controlled by the Muslims, controlled by the different cultures there. So in a way, Europe was kind of blocked from even going that way. So what did they do? They thought, sea travel. And like I said, that's when we started going out and realizing everything else in, all the other different cultures and lands and that make up this planet Earth, right? So my main point that I want us to focus on is that little area down there by Serbia. So not only do we see ethnic conflict in this area because we have different cultural groups that are kind of fighting with each other, we also then see these larger European nations that are kind of behind the scenes pulling the strings. It's like something like, say, Germany supported one group, and then we have Russia supporting kind of the Serbs, and and that need to define cultural dominance between those groups there in the Balkan Peninsula is kind of, once again, it kind of started that spark that caused the assassination and then started World War One. Now, one of the main things here is with Russia's involvement is that, looking at this map, we see that Russia is pretty much blocked from getting anywhere to get resources, right? Because, you're going to have to go through those other European countries, you're going to have to go through the Middle East, or you're going to have to go down through Africa. And so the easiest way that Russia at the time figured out that they could do their trade was going down the Black Sea and kind of cutting through the Mediterranean Sea and cutting over. And then, the river systems that run here through the Balkan Peninsula, so that bottom part, Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Albania. So, so that was a big reasons for why Russia was involved there in Serbia. And, it makes sense because if they would have lost any access there, they would be really blocked from being able to go out and expand. And, that's kind of important because Russia is a big, massive land. And of course, now we have a bunch of different nation states that make up that massive land. And so, once again, in order to take care of your people, you have to find a way to get resources to them. So, by having that block, they weren't going to be able to do that. So we could see how that something like that would cause tension. And then, of course, there's just the whole power, like I said, that whole like European power struggle because when it comes down to it, especially like France and Germany, Germany and Russia, they've always, for even kind of prehistoric times, have been fighting over that space of land that we call Europe. And, once again, that kind of came to a head here with World War One. So, when World War One started, people were super excited about it, and it's because we'd been through this period. Even though we've kind of had these little battles and wars in other parts of the world, like in the Americas, over with China, and down on the continent of Africa because of colonialism and imperialism. Much of that was very detached from European society. It would be, they would have a war and then maybe you wouldn't hear about it until 6 months later. Maybe didn't even hear about it at all, depending on how isolated your town was. So war was very much romanticized at this time in history. One of the reasons for that is because probably for about 40, 50 years before World War One, Europe kind of had this surplus of agriculture. So basically what that means is that, people were happy and healthy. They had food to eat. They didn't have to worry about that. Weather was really good. So it was bright and shiny, sunshiny. And of course, we know that just as our physical bodies go, those kind of things put us in a better like mental moods and stuff. So we kind of say it was kind of this time of kind of peace and prosperity a little bit. So much so to the fact that once we get to the beginning of the 19th century, that idea of people actually being involved in wars and battles, was very much removed from the population in this generation. And a lot of it, like I said, was romanticized. A lot of what people knew about war at this time was just what they read, not read, because most people couldn't really read at this time, right? But it would be those stories that the storytellers would sit around the fireplace and tell everybody, or come to the king's banquet hall and weave these tales for people. So so war was seen as something that was very gallant and brave and chivalrous and all these sorts of, once again, romanticized ideas. The horror and the reality of war was just kind of, people didn't really think about that. And it's because, if no one's telling you and, they present the story in a certain way, you're kind of not really going to think about that, right? So people were super excited, and we also, I think, have to think about the age group too. With World War I, we probably have about mainly 16-year-old to probably about mid 20-year-old men. So this is a time in our development where our brains don't fully develop until in our 30s. And we're really we're just coming out of adolescence, and so our bodies are still kind of adjusting because of hormones and stuff like that. And so it's really easy to get really excited about something when you're in that adolescence, kind of early adulthood stage of development, right? So we could see how the boys were really excited about everything, and then of course the girls are going to be just as excited too, because they've heard of the stories of the men go off to war and the brave knight that comes back and is your true love, all those stories like that. So like I said, very romanticized, delusional idea of the realities of war. And they were so excited about it that they didn't even think it was going to be a big deal. Like we see in this picture, this is a picture, it's probably about September-ish. And I believe French, that's what I thought. I believe this is French troops that we see going off to battle. And they actually thought that the war was going to be over by Christmas. So, it was kind of that idea of and not even when winter gets hard enough. It's like, oh, we'll just be there for the end of, harvest season. Actually, the war would have started earlier had not, had crops not needed to be harvested. You can't go to war if you can't feed people. So that's some of the reasons why we see like us, Austria take the steps that they take, and then mobilizing, and then Germany getting involved, because Germany was kind of like the big brother to Austria. Austria was kind of like, Russia, if you don't leave us alone, we're going to sick Germany on you. And yeah, crazy. So kind of crazy stuff like that, right? But so they thought that they'd be over by Christmas, and that of course did not prove to be true. Okay, and then of course, with any government, this is where nationalism kind of comes in. You have to motivate people to go out and support the country, support the nation, right? And so we see a lot of propaganda. That's something else that we'll talk a lot about in classes. Is propaganda, is how governments and the people, leaders kind of influence our mindsets, and how that plays and the decisions that we make as individuals, and then collectively. So we see this idea of going over the top, and like I said, they really didn't, nobody really took it seriously. But you had to kind of show face, had to make sure you had your armies come out. I guess in many ways they thought they were just going to play war, and so we see all these really inspiring and motivating propaganda posters, like the one that we have shown on this slide. And so this idea of, once again, going over the top, we see the difference of how they were idealizing it in their heads, and then what's really going on in reality. In that one, everybody's happy, everybody's uniforms are all clean and pristine, it's a bright sunny day. And then what really happens in reality, you're out there in the mud, you're in the element, mud, excuse me, rain, cold, all the elements. You've got rodents, rats, things like that live out in nature, or harassing you. And then in the middle of, and then of course in all of that, you're in the middle of fighting. So, we see it wasn't as much fun uh, as it was portrayed to be. And then, of course, we're going to use the Brits as an example here. But it's kind of they're just the example. This idea was pretty much reflected in all the nations. But the soldiers, you were expected to carry all your equipment with you at at all times. And then of course, it had to be in clean and in pristine condition the whole times. So with this slide, we just see kind of an example of just you know, how that idea plays out in the real world. So we see, you know, at first everybody shows up and they're all prim and proper, ready for tea time, right? And then we see with just in a couple of days, you know, you don't have anywhere to, you know, they don't have sinks, they don't have restrooms, you know, there's nowhere to wash yourself up. Maybe they have a creek or a river they come up to, but you know, they don't have washing machines, dryers, none of that stuff. So within a few days, you're going to start getting dirty. And then, you know, after a few weeks, you know, with one unit, because most of the time they only had one uniform. Maybe they got a jacket, a heavier jacket or blanket during winter times. But for the most part, you know, what you see in that picture is your stuff that you were given when you signed up. And then, like I said, within even less than a month, you see the very disheveled and kind of unclean way that people appeared. But of course, when it came to those propaganda posters, that was something that they didn't show, you know, never. And a lot of it with war, you know, I think maybe some of us, we may have this idea that war, it's this constant barrage of just fighting and killing and dying, and that's not really the case. There, you know, it's like that. It's kind of like anything in life, guys. You know, life kind of goes along, and then all of a sudden, maybe something really crazy happens, and you go through that, and then everything kind of stabilizes. And when we kind of go back to doing our things, right? Same, no difference here. So, you know, a lot of the times it was just these guys sitting around in these trenches, sleeping, bored, you know, doing whatever to pass the time until, you know, they would actually get into a fight with somebody. And I would probably suspect that a lot of the fighting that did happen was probably just because of that. Somebody was bored, and so, and you know those types of personalities be like, oh, we got to stir it up. We got to get something started here. And I'm sure that's how things like that happen, right? And so then we have this, we are left with the question of why do you think the governments, you know, in their propaganda posters, they wouldn't show the fighting? It's kind of a no-brainer, right, guys? Because if you showed what was really going on, people wouldn't want to do it, right? That's why the Vietnam War kind of changed the way that we, as you know, we who don't participate in the war, civilians, see war. Because you know, every night people were inundated with the horrors. They were seeing the dead bodies. They were given the counts of those on TV every night, and so that then made people stop and go, wait a minute, what indeed are we doing this for? And so, you know, that's why they're not going to show that, because they don't want to demotivate people. And then what we see on this slide is just a picture of the troops just sitting in the trenches. And, you know, we see kind of boredom, maybe a few of them, they're smiling because, you know, they're getting their picture taken. So everybody doesn't want to look, you know, too down in the dumps for that. But we can already see in this picture, you see how muddy it is. You see how everybody's kind of dirty. These guys don't look like they've seen much action, right? And then, you know, once we start going more into it, you start to see, you know, things get a little disheveled, you know, that boredom sets in, people are sleeping. It looks like that, you know, in that picture on the top left there, we see the guy sleeping, and then it looks like maybe that other guy kind of looks like he might be writing a letter home or something. And then, you know, in the bottom right, we just see those soldiers in the trenches. It looks like some of them might have shovels, maybe digging out the trenches too. I'm sure that was something that was a problem they had to constantly worry about, because you know, once it rains, all that mud's going to come in on you, and so they're constantly having to clear that mud out. And then you can't really see in these pictures, but another problem would be like we see in this picture of just a countryside that has been devastated. Water, there's a lot of standing water in those trenches too. So in addition to the mass devastation that we had to cultures, identity, and just people as a result of World War I, we also had this mass devastation to just the natural environment. You know, World War I saw new military and kind of military technologies, And so we have these new types of machines, more efficient ways to kill other people, invented, and a lot of that had to come in the form of getting these bigger and better weapons that did cause more devastation. So when they would eventually go into battle, you'd pretty much have these trenches on both sides, and then all the land in the middle. It would just get barraged with bombs and bullets, and as you can see, just whatever artillery they had, it would just pretty much waylay a piece. And that's kind of important to point out too, because this is our planet, and what happens to the planet plays a role in what it means to be human too. And that all plays a role in our collective story and our histories, because guys, history is something that is very dynamic. It's not all something that's in the past and removed from us. It's a process that every day we're all a part of. And with this COVID-19 a thing that has come about, we can definitely see how we are in the middle of writing and rewriting history. And then, like I said, they were kind of a little ill-equipped, because nobody really thought that the war was going to go into those harsh winter months. And if anybody's ever been to you know Eastern Europe, Russia, ever just been to Europe in general, it can get really, really cold in the winters. And so, that could be a little demoralizing too. So, these guys, they were, like I said, lucky enough to maybe have a heavier coat. Some of those guys look like they have blankets. I would imagine with this picture, it looks to me like those guys, they're probably sitting around a fire to keep them warm. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's like another group, maybe even a totally different nation of guys that are kind of going past them, because once again, it wasn't all, if you saw somebody that was an enemy, it wasn't always, oh, fight, kill. Sometimes you're like, go on. We're not doing it today, we're too cold. You know what I mean? Kind of a mentality like that. But having to deal with those elements, it definitely changes people's mindsets, right? All right, so when it comes to World War I, of course, part of our discussion this week is looking at those battles and trying to get an understanding of where those played out, because that really plays a big role in how the face of Europe changes. So with this map, we see we don't really see changes as far as the nations go, but what we see are just those areas that were hardest hit. So it's just those areas where they were doing the most fighting. And so with World War I, we have the Eastern Front and the Western Front, kind of the same with World War II there. We have these defining areas where the battles are fought. And the main thing about this is, if you mentally note there, the Carpathian Mountains, kind of that that's what I thought. Kind of where Germany, really started to get into Russia, and we kind of see that dividing line there. That's kind of important to know, because that's kind of that part of land that, from World War II on, that we see a lot of changes in Europe. And then just another picture of soldiers out in the trenches. And so with this one, we really see that standing water. Now, we can't see past those guys' waist, but I would be willing to bet that, in they're standing in probably just as much water as we see right there. So we know, especially you guys as nurses, that causes a lot of adverse health effects. People were getting sick. Um, there it is. We'll just go to that first. One of the main adverse effects, I guess we could say, that individuals suffered from World War I would be what we call trench foot. Maybe some of you guys know this. Maybe some of you have seen this before. But basically, what it is, it's like when you take a bath or wash your hands for too long, and you start getting kind of that pruny skin, just because of like the way the water, because we're mostly made up of water. And so if you were to continue to allow that to happen, then basically your skin starts to like rot and fall off. And so that's what we see. And of course, our feet, because they carry, because we're bipedal, they carry the bulk of our weight. Our feet can take a lot of hits, and that's something that we see with World War One. We see trench foot, and then of course we change that to oh, now I'm forgetting, swamp foot with like the Vietnam War, but same thing going on there. So let me go back here a few slides. So of course, then, like I said, the horrors of war. So in addition to having to deal with things like trench foot and the board, and then, when you eventually do get into a battle, a lot of times you're sitting in those trenches. You have rotting corpses with you. These are your friends, your buddies, maybe even family members. There are different body parts laying about, and so this is all these things that these soldiers had to deal with. And then of course, they had limited food and water supplies, and the little bit of food that they could get, they would have rodents attacking and trying to, get those resources. So saw a lot of rats, and it's interesting that some of those rats, big, got really, really big. And so, they would also feed, excuse me, on the body of the dead soldiers. And then one of the technological advances of World War One has to do with, sanitation and being able to actually save lives. So, that was something that was radically different. If we just go back and look at the Civil War, we lost most soldiers regardless of size. More soldiers' lives were lost because of those unsanitary conditions of those hospitals, those field hospitals that people would get brought to. And, basically they were slaughterhouses. They had no antiseptics except for like whiskey. You could, get a chug of whiskey, chew on a stick, and then they would take a saw and chop your arm off, to save you from gangrene. Say that's pretty much it. A lot of it would have to do with infections. But what happens when you cut somebody's arm off and then you move to the next table without cleaning that saw blade, and you go on down the road, you're creating more infection, right, guys? And so, a lot of loss of life because of that. So, we learned some things since then. And so during World War One, things like ambulance services were invented, actual field hospitals. So, you had people set up right there where they were doing battle to help get people help, not to be redundant, but to help get people help easier and more and quicker. And then, we see a lot of lives saved because we have a better understanding of, disease and infection and things like amputations. And then, we see advances in helping these soldiers who, had to have these amputations. And also, and we see advances in mental health because of World War One. This is when we start to really understand PTSD. At this time, though, of course, we just called it, I just had it on the top of my tongue, shell shock. They called it shell shock during this time. And, it's basically what we call PTSD now. So, a lot of medical advances going on. All right, and then just real quickly, with this map, we see more of the continent of Africa and those different and in those different areas that kind of got broken up and then kind of overtaken by the Europeans. But a lot of times when we think about World War One and World War Two, we fail to realize that a lot of the battles were fought on the African continent and in the Middle East too. And that's important to know because once again, this relates back to those trade routes, those resources, and then those those alliance systems that get created. But there was a lot of stuff going on the African continent during this time, and even up into and even in World War II, there were a lot of battles that were fought on the African continent, and that was a good thing because it helped push Germany and Italy out of that area. Right, and so with this slide, pretty much what I just have is just some different examples of the soldiers and kind of their uniforms, and even just to give us a better idea of those different environments and landscapes that people were fighting in. I think that's one of the reasons for this kind of explosion of technology at this time too, because we had to accommodate for all that diversity to be efficient in war. All right, guys, so that wraps up our lecture as far as, our overview for World War I goes. And so what I want to do in wrapping up our lecture today is talk a little bit about our assignment and then go over APA, like basics of APA and academic writing with you guys. So in addition to your discussions each week, you always have some type of assignment. It'll be like go watch a video and then write up an analysis, go read this, write up an analysis, and then once we get to working on our final projects, we'll have specific things we have to do for that. But when it comes to academic writing and APA, keep it basic and keep it simple. So I'm looking at this assignment this week. You can either look at imperialism by looking at Rudyard Kipling's poem. Maybe you guys are familiar with him. He wrote the Jungle Book. He wrote a Ricky Tikki Taff. That's one of my favorite stories as a kid from childhood. So this poem that you get to analyze really shows Europeans' attitudes towards other and countries, and that's important to note at this time because it goes back to people vying for power and control over those resources and people and land. That idea of who is superior really comes into play, and so much so that we start to see laws written that apply to that. We start to see social ideologies and theories invented that apply to this idea that where you're either human or you're not human kind of things, and silly because we're all human, right, guys? But my point with that is, so we start to see social Darwinism becoming a main social idea in Europe. And basically social Darwinism is that idea that the most superior culture is going to dominate and win. And when it comes to the Europeans, they viewed themselves as most superior because they did all these things that other cultures didn't do. And it's like, well, maybe it's because they were like content where they were and they didn't want to go out and invade and kill other people. But we'll see as we progress through class, and we can all make up our own mind about that. So just with Kipling's poem, it definitely relates to those ideas of social Darwinism, ethnocentrism, imperialism, and nationalism. And it's important to think about those because that really helps us understand then why Germany went to war and World War II. So that's something else. When it comes to World War I, we often blame Germany, and Germany does get blamed for starting that. But it's really a little bit of everybody. Like I kind of said earlier, Germany was like the big brother to Austria, and they felt threatened by Russia. Those were like the three main ones battling it out with each other to cause World War I there. So nobody is really solely to blame, but Germany did indeed get the sole blame, and that explains a lot of why Hitler came into power. And then if you choose the other option for your essay this week, you'll go and watch the video on the Armenian genocide. And this directly relates to those ideas of ethnocentrism and social Darwinism too, because, once again, it's okay for us all to be different. It's okay for us all to be great at a specific thing. But when we start saying, oh, well, I'm better than you and you're less than me, that's when we start getting into trouble as human beings. We need to come back to that collective idea of, we need everybody doing their part in order to help us all learn and grow and move forward in those positive and productive ways. Right, guys? And so basically, when it comes to academic writing, like I keep saying, keep it basic, keep it simple. So when it comes to a basic academic essay, you can always think of it as 5 paragraphs. So no matter what assignment you're writing, what class it's for, if you follow this, this basic formula, then it's a lot easier for you then to go about writing up your assignments. It's a lot easier to include those APA elements, and more specifically, it makes it super easier for you guys to clear up that space in your mind so that you can talk about these events and analyze history in your own words, because that's a lot, that's something that I hear frequently, especially when it comes to like originality. We are talking about history, so it's all facts and it's all, somebody has said before. But the thing about it is that we're able to put our own spin on all of these events. So, yeah, you're going to be talking about a lot of facts as you go through and you do your assignments and your discussion. But it's always important that we try to write about those in our own words. Okay, guys? And so that basic academic essay, that formula, 5 paragraphs, introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And then you always want a title page and a reference page. Your introduction is always going to state your thesis and give an overview of what your paper is talking about. So when it comes to writing, sometimes it's best to save that introduction for last, because how do you know how to summarize a paper that you haven't written yet? Right? Kind of makes sense, right, guys? So if you go through and start like on those body paragraphs, like so pretty much you start in the middle and start writing the bulk of information that you're writing your paper on, it makes it a lot, then it's all fresh in your mind, and it's a lot easier to go back and go, oh yeah, this is exactly what to write that introduction and say, oh yeah, this is exactly an overview of what I just wrote. So I hope that that makes sense. And then when it comes to those main points, and there's always going to be some kind of bulleted assignment questions or like kind of just specific points for you to think about in reference to that assignment. And so that's a good idea, a good way to help come up with your main points. Maybe you read over and you're like, well, I'm not really sure what to read about as far as like Kipling's poem for this week or the Armenian genocide goes. Look at those specific things it's asking you and then use that to write those paragraphs. And then when it comes to your conclusion, the introduction and conclusion, they're the same thing because they have the same job. They're both to inform and provide that overview of what the paper is about. And the introduction, though, you're just, you're giving the preview. With the conclusion, you're wrapping it up. So even though you're saying the same information, you're restating your thesis, you don't want to just copy and paste. You want to change your grammar, your syntax, and things like that around a little bit, so you're reflecting that preview and that wrap up. Hopefully that makes sense. And then, of course, you always want to make sure that you have in-text citations and references. A good rule of thumb is at least one in-text citation per paragraph. Now, of course, that can get more complicated because in that paragraph, you have a specific fact that you read or stated. You want to specifically cite that. But for the most part, like I said, since with history, a lot of it's going to be all facts. As long as we have one at the beginning of the paragraph or at the end of the paragraph, you'll be good on that APA requirement and won't get points marked off for that, okay? Here are just the references for how you would note those sources for the assignment this week. And then when it comes to the in-text citations, a good rule of thumb to make that easy and simple is just the last name and date. To refer to the genocide denied video in your essay, whatever you're talking about from that, at the end of that sentence, into that paragraph, you would just put journeyman pictures 2002, right? It would be Clipling 2009. So I'll give you some more. We'll look at specific examples of that in just a minute so you guys understand that. So APA, a lot of the times gives most of us trouble, and because it seems really complicated. But just like I said with writing academically, when we follow that basic formula, it helps make that easier. The same applies to APA. APA, it's a simple formula, and no matter what source you have, no matter where you get that source, no matter what they're talking about, the elements are always going to follow that formula. And the formula is always who wrote it, when did they write it, what is it, and where did you get it? And like I just said, that formula is what you're going to use for your reference page, because your references, you have to have all that information. With your in-text citation, you got to think of that as like a shorthand. It's just a simple notation of, hey, this is where I got that information from. So you don't want to get bogged down by putting that whole formula in your writing, because it's going to distract from your voice and what you're saying. So the quick way to do that is to do a simple in-text citation, and you just want who wrote it and what is it. So just the person's last name, comma, and the date of that source. And then, like I said, you'll put the full information on the references. So that all sounds kind of crazy. So let's look at some examples to help kind of bring that all together and make sense. All right. So first of all, we use APA. APA is simply a writing style. It's a way to note where the information we're talking about came from, and it's a way to share that information. So think of it as if, so you came up with some great new cake design, or maybe you come up with some revolutionary way to do something in nursing, and that's your thing. You started it. You put all the hard work in to create that, and then you take it out in the world and start sharing with people, and nobody gives you credit for it. Everybody forgets that you're the one that did it. And so you think, how would that make you feel? We'd be a little upset about that, right? And so APA is just that. It's just that way to give these authors credit for the time and energy that they put in to compile these history facts and information for us, so that we're able to share them with each other, and hopefully grow within ourselves, and to help us get those different interpretations of what was really going on in history. Because I guess when it comes to history, it's kind of all our interpretation, and the key thing there is to get a good interpretation that, once again, helps us all move forward in those positive and productive ways. All right, so like I said, since basically everything we're talking about in class is a fact, you want to cite that. So that's why I say just use that one citation at the end of a paragraph. But just quickly, and so if in other classes, if you're not sure how to include APA, general rule of thumb: names, dates, places, proper nouns, anything specific to a source. So like, say you read psychologist Sigmund Freud and his book Psychoanalysis, and in that book he talks specifically about defense mechanisms, and that's the first time we've ever heard this idea. And you go to talk about it in your book, or I mean, in your writing, you want to make sure that you specifically say, hey, I got this from Freud in that year, which is the year that he wrote that book. So as you see right there with my example, I have an example from our textbook. So I just have the last name and the date. So the main causes of World War I, blah, 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 and then parentheses, Diker 2015. That's boom, guys. That's the easy way to do it. Like I said, no matter what paper you're writing, what the subject's about. If you do it like that, you know, it saves you a lot of hassle and heartache in the long run. And then, you know, by following that formula, your brain, you start training your brain to it. So it gets a lot easier to add those elements in, because when it comes to writing, it's more important that you're focusing on your voice and what you have to say. APA should kind of be, it's kind of like a tag on, you know, it'd be like, you know, because I didn't really come up with all these ideas, I just want to give that credit to my sources. Hopefully that makes sense, guys. And then when it comes to reference pages, that is how you would note the course textbook there. So make sure you just note the different a way to do the font. You see I've got the italicized there as far as the name of the book goes. Got the edition. Make sure you note where those commas, periods, parentheses, things like that go. That's just all part of the formula. So like I said, you know, no matter if it was like a website, like a lot of students like to use, like a history.org website, you know, you're going to set it up. It's going to be, you know, who is it? What was the date? What is it called? Where did you get it from? A lot of time that where did you get it from information is going to change. And I think that's what throws us off. But, you know, if you follow that formula, you should always be able to fill in your elements. And that, I think, guys, brings us to a conclusion for our first meeting. Once again, I'm really excited to be here with all of you guys. I've enjoyed going through our introduction discussion so far, and I'm enjoying getting into our first official history discussion with World War I there. And guys, I'm just excited all around. I like talking about this stuff. We usually have a good time in class. I know we're going to have a great time this semester. Anything you guys need, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I know that you guys, more so than me, because I am not a nurse, are dealing with the COVID-19. And as far as that goes, guys, just communicate with me. As long as you can communicate with me, it gives me a little bit more flexibility as far as our options in class go. So glad to have everybody here. I'll see you guys in the discussions. Last but not least, you'll probably be watching this tomorrow on Wednesday. Like I said, we have those open offices on Wednesday where it's just me hanging out. I don't have the camera on or anything, but if you want to pop in and catch me live to ask any questions, comments, or any concerns, you can do that. Please, if you don't, you know, if that's not an option for you, you can always email me. You know, specifically work online, and I'm here at the house with the animals, so you know, I'm always answering my emails. Maybe like six. There'll be sometimes I'll do it 6 days instead of 7 days out of the week, but for the most part, I'm always answering emails. And then if you ever want to schedule a private office, or if you want to schedule a phone chat, we can always do that too. Like I said, guys, I'm here to do anything and everything I can to help you guys be successful in your academic journey. So, all right, guys, thanks, and I'll see you in the discussions. Bye.